Hey, I think we're live, so welcome back to our June and July focus areas. This next segment, we're going to be working on some floor-based movements. So this is the Shin box setup. What we want to start with, the basics, going from regression to is opening up the knees if we need to get to almost like a 90-degree knee, 90-degree hip position. For people that lack internal hip rotation, this knee might need to be propped up a little bit. We could get a cushion, a pad, and kind of reduce the amount of range of motion that we're requiring for internal hip rotation. So that's step one. Hands start behind for the base starting point, and I'm leaning back a little bit. You can lean back as much as you need to create space for the hips to come through and roll from internal to external rotation. Why is this a good movement? It's amazing as far as hip mobility goes. We get good internal and external hip rotation. It's also ground-based, so it takes away the fear of falling. So it's amazing for get some sensory feedback, kinesthetic feedback from the floor, and also just feeling really comfortable, confident. People with vestibular challenges or inner ear challenges where in standing, doing a lot of the skipping, head turns, things like that, they may not be 100% comfortable, but this is typically a really good place to start for people with vestibular issues. So the second piece of this progression is to turn it into a breathing drill. We're going to take the hands away. So step one, hands are down on the floor. We're switching the hips back and forth a few times. Step two, hands are going to come up. We can get into this nice upright posture. Again, takes a little bit more hip mobility, so it is a progression. You can stay with step one if you need to. We're going to take a deep breath in and then exhale. Blow that air out as we switch from internal to external hip rotation. Deep breath in again, and going through that transition. So that's step two. It's kind of sequencing the breathing in the static, exhale through the dynamic part of the movement. Could we load this at some point? Yes. Holding a light dumbbell, light kettlebell is actually going to increase the stability demand on the midline on the core quite a bit, and load the hips more, which makes the mobility piece of it a little bit more challenging as well. So the next step is to put one hand down. So that was step one, step two. Now we're going step three. We're going to go ahead and put one hand on the floor. For people with restriction in the thoracic spine or the rib cage, this one may be a little bit more challenging, or tension in the shoulder. So great mobilization for those areas too. But again, keep in mind, you might need to stick with step one or step two. If you do, don't worry about it. The progressions can come gradually. So we want to get used to those first two first. And you can see as I'm going here, as I pivot, keep this hand anchored to the floor, creates a lot more challenge for both rib cage and then getting internal rotation all the way through in that hip. So you might find that you need to slide this hand across the floor a little bit, move it along with you as you go through those transitions. Of course, we would also work on that other side. So I got hand anchored on the floor. I'm going to pivot and come back through, breathing throughout that pattern. So that's step three, right? We got two hands, no hands, one hand. And then the last part of the progression, we're going to actually start to come up and create some hip extension and flexion out of this to really start to strengthen the hips. So not just mobility, but we're going to improve on strength here. Again, something where we could load with a band. We could be doing some pal-off presses here. We could be doing a hold with a light kettlebell, a sandbag, a light dumbbell, and then coming up to a kneeling position. So coming down with control is really going to help focus on that eccentric, strengthening the hips. So if I come down as slow and controlled as I can, hands can come forward to counterbalance those hips driving back. Then, of course, we pivot and work on that on the other side. So what I'm trying to do on this base foot here is create like a cylinder to roll or pivot over top of. So I'm going to get this foot out of the way, point it, so the toes are pointed towards this leg, and then I'm driving up and then coming back down. So driving up and then coming back down with control. We can string that together into a sequence of pivot, hip extension, come back down, pivot, hip extension, and come back down. So that's our kind of ground flow sequence 1 in Shin box. As far as coaching, we can get creative with loading it. We can work on different breathing patterns, especially that exhale through the dynamic phase of the movement, and then breathing in again here. So hopefully that makes sense and you have fun with it. Build up that hip range of motion as well as hip strength. And I'll see you for more ground-based movement in the next video. Thanks.